Look, if Hollow Knight broke your heart, ruined your sleep schedule, and made you question every other game you've ever played, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That feeling of stepping into a world that feels alive, somber, and completely indifferent to whether you survive or not. The weight of every boss fight, the silence and tension of exploring a place that clearly wasn't made for you. And when the game was finally over, nothing else seemed to have the same spark. It was precisely because I went through that I decided to put this list together. The Metroidvania scene right now is simply insane. Honestly, recent times have delivered some absolute gems that carry that exact same DNA. Precise controls, beautiful hand-drawn worlds, stories hidden in the scenery, and that uncontrollable urge to push through just one more screen, even knowing it's past midnight and you have work tomorrow. So if you're still trying to recapture that incredible feeling Hollow Knight left behind, let's take a look at what you need to keep an eye on right now.
And exterminate the creatures that dwell within. The Demon Lord himself will fall by our hand. This mission.
If you loved Hollow Knight, Bushiden is one of those games worth putting on your radar immediately, especially if what hooks you is exploration with backtracking and character evolution through new abilities. It's a futuristic 2D action platformer from Pixel Arc Studios that puts you in the role of a ninja on a journey against Gao and his cybernetic army following the disappearance of the protagonist's sister. What strikes me most here is that Bushiden seems to understand that delightful feeling of, now I can go back and open what was closed before, because bosses unlock new movement and combat abilities, allowing you to revisit stages to access new areas and grow stronger. For those who love Hollow Knight for its mastery and discovery-based progression, this is a huge sign that Bushiden speaks to the same part of the brain that loves exploring every corner of the map. However, Bushiden doesn't try to be a Hollow Knight clone, and to me, that's what makes it more interesting. Its identity leans heavily into futuristic ninja fantasy with a focus on fast, aggressive action. The game highlights a combat system geared toward crowd control, designed to handle hordes of enemies along with chai spells and upgrades purchased at a tech shop. So the feeling is less about fragility and more about sharp offensive power. Another strong selling point is the presentation. The official material emphasizes pixel art drawn and animated with great care. And honestly, this kind of well-made retro look carries a lot of charisma on its own. Bushiden also features 7 stages plus a prologue area, suggesting a more organized, stage-based structure, but still with room for revisiting, secrets, and continuous character growth. Bushiden seems to be less about melancholy and more about style, speed, and precision, but it hits the bullseye on elements this audience usually loves, like exploration, bosses, upgrades, and abilities that transform how you view the entire path. So if your thing is Metroidvanias with rewarding backtracking, sharp combat, and a cyberpunk ninja pixel art aesthetic, this is the kind of game that truly deserves to be on your list. If Hollow Knight left you feeling orphaned by that void of finishing a special Metroidvania and thinking, okay, what do I play now? Then Crowsworn is exactly the kind of name that deserves to be on your radar. It gives off that same feeling of a mysterious world, striking visuals and exploration that feels like it's hiding something in every corner, but with a much more aggressive, darker energy geared toward action. For me, the great charm here is exactly that. It doesn't seem to want to be just another Hollow Knight-like, but rather take that foundation and push it toward a more brutal and stylish side. What I like most about Crowsworn is its visual identity. It has that heavy gothic atmosphere, characters with a strong presence, and an art direction that seems designed to stick in the minds of those who like decaying, strange, and fascinating worlds. It's the kind of game that, just by looking at it, sells the fantasy of entering a cursed ancient place full of secrets, and that counts for a lot for those who love the atmosphere of Hallownest. But where I think Crowsworn really begins to differentiate itself is in the combat. While Hollow Knight has a more precise and contained elegance, Crowsworn gives the impression of being more explosive, more offensive, and more in your face, as if every encounter asks for more confidence and more style from the player. This is something I really like, because it doesn't feel like a game focused only on surviving the map, but on making you feel increasingly dangerous as you master movement, attacks, and rhythm. Regarding exploration, it has everything to hook the same audience that loves returning to old areas, discovering hidden paths, and realizing the map opens up in unexpected ways. However, in Crowsworn's case, this curiosity comes wrapped in a more sinister aesthetic, almost as if every new region promises not just a surprise, but a threat. I find this very powerful because it transforms exploration into something not only rewarding, but also tense. And that contrast usually makes the journey much more memorable. It seems to be that game that speaks to the same passion for Metroidvanias, memorable bosses, and an interconnected world, but with a fiercer, more gothic personality focused on impact. So if you're looking for a spiritual successor in terms of feeling, but want something with its own presence and a darker, more aggressive vibe, Crowsworn is easily one of the most promising names for you to follow. Developed by Swede Nicholas Hallen and published by Burning Planet Digital, Alruna End of History is the evolution of the first game in this series, bringing a world where nature tries to survive the dominance of the oppressive necro-industrialists. The thematic contrast here is very strong and interesting. You control Alruna, a flower nymph exploring decaying cathedrals in search of salvation for herself and other tormented dryads. It's the kind of dense and reflective setting that immediately resonates with those who spent hours braving the ruins of Halidest. What makes me recommend this game so directly to Hollow Knight fans is the world design. Alruna adopts that classic, delightful structure of a totally interconnected map, where every corner of the environment can hide a secret under a rock that looked harmless. The game promises massive temples and high-level dungeons, designed to reward curiosity and constant exploration. For those who love the feeling of getting lost in a map and putting the world's puzzle together in their own head, the promise of dense level design full of shortcuts is a real treat. In terms of gameplay and movement, the game shows an expressiveness that is a joy to see. Alruna's progression is heavily focused on upgrades that completely change how you interact with the environment, such as super jumps, air dashes, and vines that can grow from any surface. Exploration also exists, but it's different from what you expect coming from Hollow Knight. Instead of that continuous world full of organic backtracking, everything here is divided by Codex, the books, each with its own secrets, bosses, and progression. This makes the game more accessible and less confusing, but at the same time, it takes away a bit of that feeling of constant discovery that Hollow Knight does so well. Overall, being honest with you, Ariana and the Elder Codex is a game that anyone who loves Metroidvanias should try, but with adjusted expectations. It doesn't have the same artistic depth or interconnected world as Hollow Knight, but it compensates with more varied gameplay systems, creative builds, and a different premise that refreshes the genre. If you want something in the same vein, but with more focus on action and customization, this one might grab you hard. I'll get straight to the point. Bloodstained, the Scarlet engagement has everything to hook you, but in a slightly different way, and that's precisely what makes the experience so interesting. It follows that classic Metroidvania vibe, but leans much more toward hardcore Castlevania, with a strong focus on combat, builds, and character progression. It's not as minimalist and mysterious as Hollow Knight, but it compensates with variety and style. One thing that caught my eye right away is the combat. Here, it's much more direct and, honestly, more explosive. You have an absurd number of weapons, abilities, and ways to set up your build, which gives a level of freedom that Hollow Knight doesn't have as much of. You can play more aggressively, more technically, or even cheese it with broken combinations, and it's addictive. That feeling of getting stronger and mastering the game grows fast. Exploration remains one of the pillars, but it has a different rhythm. While Hollow Knight leaves you more lost and requires patience to understand the world, Bloodstained is more guided, which can be good or bad depending on your taste. I particularly think it's great when I want something more dynamic, without spending hours stuck trying to figure out where to go. Still, there are secrets, hidden areas, and rewards that make exploring every corner worth it. Another thing that carries a lot of weight is the visual style and atmosphere. It doesn't have that melancholy and artistic air of Hollow Knight, but it bets on a more detailed, classic dark fantasy look. It might not be as artistically striking, but it works very well within its premise. And the soundtrack follows the same line. Less contemplative, more energetic, it matches the game's pace perfectly. Overall, to be honest, I see Bloodstained, the Scarlet engagement, as the perfect kind of game for someone who loved Hollow Knight but wants something more focused on action, progression, and gameplay variety. It doesn't try to be the same, and that's a win. If you go in expecting a different vibe but still within the Metroidvania sphere, the chances of you getting hooked are extremely high.
These human sacrifices must be stopped.
Ariana and the Elder Codex is that kind of Metroidvania that feels tailor-made, but with its own identity that might surprise you, for better or worse. It mixes Metroidvania with action RPG, and a very different approach. Here, instead of a single interconnected world, you enter books, the codices, each functioning as a mini adventure with its own map. The story revolves around Ariana, a librarian who literally enters magic books to restore the world. And honestly, that already gives the game an absurd amount of charm. Besides the main mission of recovering lost magic, she also seeks answers about her parents' disappearance, which adds a more emotional touch to the narrative. I found the idea very creative, but being honest, the execution isn't as strong as it could be. There are interesting moments, but it doesn't reach the level of impact Hollow Knight has. Now, where the game really shines is in the combat and builds. Here it goes way beyond the standard. There are over 30 spells, you can equip several at once and create combinations however you like. This completely changes the pace of the gameplay. You aren't stuck with just one style. Want to play more aggressively? You can. Want to focus on control and strategy? You can do that too. This freedom is one of the things that would easily keep me hooked on this game. Exploration also exists, but it's different from what you expect coming from Hollow Knight. Instead of that continuous world full of organic backtracking, everything here is divided by Codex, the books, each with its own secrets, bosses, and progression. This makes the game more accessible and less confusing, but at the same time, it takes away a bit of that feeling of constant discovery that Hollow Knight does so well. Overall, being honest with you, Ariana and the Elder Codex is a game that anyone who loves Metroidvanias should try, but with adjusted expectations. It doesn't have the same artistic depth or interconnected world as Hollow Knight, but it compensates with more varied gameplay systems, creative builds, and a different premise that refreshes the genre. If you want something in the same vein, but with more focus on action and customization, this one might grab you hard. Saint Slayer. Spear of Sacrilege isn't a traditional Metroidvania, but it hits the bullseye on something many fans of the genre love. That precise, punishing combat full of personality. Here, you take on the role of Rudiger, a former soldier who must face a grotesque threat in a dark 17th century Europe, with a very heavy and even somewhat disturbing vibe at times. What most caught me about this game is its style. It's basically a love letter to the hardcore Castlevania classics. Stiffer movement, committed jumping, enemies placed cruelly, everything is designed to test you. don't expect the fluidity of Hollow Knight. Here, the challenge comes precisely from the limitation, and that creates constant tension in every stage. Now, if there's something that will keep you playing, it's the content. There are over 20 stages, intense bosses, and that addictive loop of dying, learning, and improving. Additionally, the game still has full local co-op, which is rare in this type of experience. And honestly, it must be chaotic in the best possible way. Another point that surprised me was how much it tries to go beyond the basics. You can find familiars, like animal companions, unlock upgrades, and even make decisions during the journey, helping or screwing over NPCs, which can impact the experience. This adds an extra layer that slightly recalls that sense of discovery we have in Hollow Knight, even if the structure here is more linear. In the end, I see Saint Slayer as a game that doesn't try to be Hollow Knight, but rather something you probably also love without realizing it. A brutal retro challenge with a heavy atmosphere and gameplay that demands respect. If you enjoy fair difficulty, a dark aesthetic, and that old school feeling that few modern games can deliver, this one is practically mandatory to keep an eye on. Goblin Vyke, the thief tycoon from Art Thieves, arrives on Steam on April 30th, 2026, and the proposal is one of the most original I've seen in a 2D side-scroller. The premise opens with one of the best opening lines an indie game can have. Vyke's father's last words were "be greedy," and that's exactly what you're going to do. By day, you're a merchant trading goods in your little shop in a medieval city. By night, you put on your goblin helmet and infiltrate dungeons full of traps and guards to steal everything that isn't nailed down, and some things that are. What caught my attention most in the gameplay system is that Vyke is not a warrior. He is too weak to face any enemy head-on, so you need to use your head, throw a beetle disguised as a bell to distract guards, use sleep traps, create smoke to escape, and even steal weapons directly from enemies' hands. There's an enormous satisfaction in sneaking through an entire corridor of guards and leaving with your pockets full. The shop management side isn't just for show. You start buried in debt and need to hire employees, each with unique attributes. There's the Man of Steel who never falls, the storage expert who carries more items, and the lazy one who returns with almost nothing. The combination of managing your team by day and risking everything in a dungeon by night creates a loop that doesn't stop pulling you back. The game demo is already available on Steam with 2 to 3 hours of content, letting you explore the first large area, the Cathedral of the Nameless God, unlock 7 different NPC storylines, and experiment with various skills and charms that shape your thieving style. If you miss the feeling Hollow Knight gave you when you discovered a new area and thought, this is gonna kill me a lot, but I need to explore, Goblin Vyke will give you exactly that, with a layer of humor and goblin greed that no other game delivers. If you spent hundreds of hours in Hollow Knight exploring every dark corner of that world and leaving wanting more, but in that specific Metroidvania way that makes you feel small before something much larger than yourself, then Shattered Divinities is exactly the game you need on your radar for now. Developed by Stellar Soul and published by True Color Games, the launch is set for May 2026 on Steam, and the demo is already available for you to test now. The game's backdrop is epic in the heaviest sense of the word. A war of the gods destroyed the entire world, and what remains are the 4 great calamities. The abyss that swallowed all light, the dusk reach that froze time, the blightmire that turned flesh into a nightmare, and the inferno that rained fire from the sky. You wake up in the middle of these ruins, in a place called Rebel's Hold, without memories, without certainties, and with a mission to track down what happened. Sound familiar? The atmosphere is heavy in the same way as Hollow Knight, and the fragmented narrative pulls you in through curiosity. The map is giant and completely interconnected, with more than 12 regions with unique themes, hundreds of labyrinthine passages, and more than 30 bosses scattered along the way, each shaped by the catastrophes that destroyed the world. The demo already delivers 3 of these areas to explore and 5 bosses to face, and those who played reported that the combat is fluid, responsive, and fast enough to never feel clunky. This accelerated pace is one of the game's differentiators compared to the heavier style of other Metroidvanias. The build system is where the game really shows its stuff. You collect divinity fragments scattered throughout the world, and 5 divine sigils, face warp for fast teleportation, sky step for aerial movement, bulwark for blocking and counterattacking, assault for sequence attacks, and summoning to call forth creatures that fight with you. The combination of these elements creates exclusive combos that reflect your playstyle. You can go all in aggressive, surgical and precise, or chaotic by summoning everything at once. What got me excited about Shattered Divinities was realizing that there is clearly a lot of soul here. The pixel art is colorful but doesn't lose the dark tone of the setting. The lore is built in fragments that you discover as you progress. And the weight of facing entities that were gods and are now corrupted monsters gives a feeling very close to what Hollow Knight did so well. If you want to put it on your wish list before the launch in May, give the demo a chance. This game might really surprise you. Clockwork Ambrosia takes the foundation of the Metroidvania, exploration, interconnected map, progression through abilities, and mixes it with something I didn't expect to see working so well: combat focused on fully customizable weapons. Almost as if it were a build simulator inside a platformer. Unlike Hollow Knight, which is much more melee and precise, here everything revolves around long-range weapons that you literally assemble piece by piece. You can create absurd combinations, shots that ricochet, explode, pierce enemies, or fill the entire screen. Best of all, the game encourages you to experiment without fear, almost like a sandbox of creative destruction. The story also has that classic touch of mystery that Metroidvania fans will enjoy. You play as Iris, an aircraft engineer who suffers an accident and ends up trapped on an island full of machines, monsters, and ruins of a vanished civilization. And that feeling of what happened here pulls you further into exploration, very much in the vibe of discovering Hallownest for the first time. Although it recalls Hollow Knight in structure, the feeling is different. Clockwork Ambrosia is less about precision and punishing difficulty and more about creativity and adaptation. It's almost as if it mixed Metroidvania with a touch of Mega Man and even some build crafting like Path of Exile, but applied to weapons. This completely changes the pace of the game and makes everything more explosive and experimental. I see this game as a perfect recommendation for those who have already beaten everything in the Hollow Knight style and want something new without leaving their comfort zone entirely. It delivers exploration, progression, and that feeling of discovery, but with an extra layer of depth in combat that can keep you hooked for hours just testing combinations. Honestly, it has everything to be one of those indies that start out quiet and quickly become cult hits. If you spent hours exploring Hallownest, Mariachi Legends is a title that enters the radar for sharing that solid foundation of exploration and technical precision. Developed by Halberd Studios, the same team behind 9 Years of Shadows, the game distances itself from the melancholy aesthetic of Hollow Knight to embrace Mexican folklore and the Day of the Dead. The structure is that of a classic 2D Metroidvania, but the focus here is clearly geared toward denser and more visceral combat, using a pixel art perspective that prioritizes animation fluidity over just visual style. Controlling Pablo Cruz, a detective who makes a pact with death, the gameplay relies on a fencing system that requires timing. Unlike the almost aerial agility of the Knight, the movement in Santa Miscoda feels more grounded, focusing on parries, guards, and the use of the La Sombra ability for positioning manipulation. Technically, command response is the central point. The studio worked so that the tactile feedback during boss encounters is punishing, requiring pattern learning that recalls the rigor of the genre's best titles. Visually, the artwork delivers a density of detail that rivals what we saw in Blasphemous. The use of vibrant colors contrasts with the brutal theme described by the developers, and performance is optimized to keep frames stable, something essential for a game where a one-frame delay in a parry results in defeat. The scenarios vary from historical haciendas to ancient ruins, all built with multiple layers of depth that help navigation without cluttering the combat readability. A technical balance difficult to achieve in complex pixel art. One aspect that differentiates the experience is the progression system linked to local culture. In addition to finding traditional upgrades, you need to collect ingredients and cook typical dishes to obtain temporary and permanent buffs, adding a layer of resource management to the exploration loop. This cooking mechanic and interacting with NPCs to solve investigation mysteries give the game its own pace, alternating between the tension of fights and more rhythmic moments of exploration that expand the world beyond simple combat. With a launch in the second quarter of 2026, Mariachi Legends positions itself as a technical alternative for those seeking challenge and a distinct setting. It doesn't try to replicate Team Cherry's formula, but rather refine 2D combat execution with a strong visual identity and well-integrated RPG mechanics. For those who value precise hitboxes and intelligent map progression, the systems implemented by Halberd Studios show clear maturity compared to the team's previous project.